The sun hung low over the dusty town, casting long shadows across the uneven wooden planks of the main street. It was the kind of place where men came to lose themselves in drink, in cards, in reckless choices that could never be undone. And on this day, one man's mistakes were about to change the lives of three young girls forever. At the center of town, a small crowd had gathered near the old mercantile, their voices a murmur of curiosity and grim interest. A rickety wooden crate had been set up as a makeshift platform, and upon it stood a thin, hollow-eyed man named Mr. Harker, his clothes worn and his hands shaking not from fear, but from the restless hunger of a gambler who had run out of luck. Beside him, clutching each other in silent terror, were his three daughters. Lily, the eldest at 16, her dark hair tied back in a frayed ribbon, her chin lifted in defiance even as her eyes betrayed her fear. Rose, 14, her face streaked with silent tears, her arms wrapped tightly around her little sister, and Daisy, just 12, small for her age, her wide eyes darting between the strangers as if searching for a kindness she had never known. The auction had been announced that morning. A man's debts had come due, and with no coin left to pay them, he had offered the only things of value he still possessed, his own children. The townsfolk had gathered, some out of pity, others out of cold calculation. There was work to be done on the frontier, and young hands could be useful whether as laborers, as maids, or worse. The bidding had already begun, voices calling out sums that turned living, breathing girls into numbers on a ledger. Lily flinched as a rough-handed farmer gestured toward her, muttering about needing another pair of hands for his fields. Rose pressed closer to Daisy, her breath coming fast, her mind racing with the horror of what might soon separate them. The little one, Daisy, had begun to tremble, her small fingers digging into Rose's sleeve as if she could anchor herself there forever. And then, cutting through the noise like a sudden gust of wind, came a voice deep, steady, and firm. Enough. The crowd parted as a tall man stepped forward, his broad shoulders squared beneath his worn duster coat. His face was lined from years of sun and hard work, his dark beard streaked with gray. This was Mr. Carter, a rancher from the valley beyond the ridge, a man known for his quiet ways and his fairness. He had come to town for supplies, not for this. But seeing those three girls, their fear, their helplessness, something in him had hardened into resolve. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The men who had been bidding fell silent, sensing something in his manner that brooked no argument. Mr. Carter's eyes met Mr. Harker's, and for a moment, the gambler seemed to shrink beneath that steady gaze. "I'll take them," Mr. Carter said, his voice calm but leaving no room for debate. All three. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some looked relieved, others exchanged glances, wondering what a man like Carter wanted with three useless girls. But no one challenged him. The price was settled not just in coin, but in the unspoken understanding that this was no ordinary transaction. Mr. Carter stepped onto the platform, his movements slow and deliberate, as if he feared startling a wounded animal. He crouched slightly, bringing himself eye level with the girls. Lily stared back at him, wary but searching his face for some hint of his intentions. Rose bit her lip, her arms still locked around Daisy, who had gone very still. "You're safe now," Mr. Carter said quietly, his voice rough but not unkind. "No one's going to hurt you. No one's going to separate you. You'll come home with me, and you'll be looked after. That's a promise." The words hung in the air, simple and plain, but to the girls, they sounded like a miracle. Lily's shoulders sagged just a fraction, as if some invisible weight had been lifted. Rose exhaled shakily, her grip on Daisy loosening ever so slightly. And little Daisy looked up at the stranger with something like hope flickering in her eyes for the very first time. Without another word, Mr. Carter turned, leading them away from the platform, away from the crowd, away from the life that had betrayed them. The girls followed, their steps hesitant but steady, their futures suddenly uncertain but no longer hopeless. And as they walked, the dust of the town settling behind them, none of them knew yet just how much their lives were about to change. The road to the Carter Ranch stretched long and winding, cutting through golden fields and patches of stubborn wildflowers that clung to the dry earth. The wagon creaked beneath the weight of its passengers, Mr. Carter sitting tall at the reins, the three girls huddled together in the back, their meager belongings bundled in a single sack between them. Lily kept her eyes fixed on the horizon, her jaw set tight, as if daring the world to test her resolve. Rose clutched Daisy's hand, her fingers trembling slightly, her mind racing with questions she was too afraid to voice. And Daisy, small and silent, watched the landscape pass with wide, uncertain eyes, as though expecting the ground to shift beneath them at any moment. The ranch emerged slowly from the haze of dust, a sturdy two-story house with a wide porch, a barn that stood solid against the wind, and a scattering of outbuildings that spoke of hard work and careful tending. Cattle dotted the distant pastures, and a pair of dogs bounded forward at the sound of the approaching wagon, their tails wagging furiously. It was a place of order, of purpose so different from the cramped, chaotic rooms the girls had known all their lives. Mr. Carter brought the wagon to a halt and turned to face them. His expression was unreadable, but his voice, when he spoke, was steady. "This is home," he said simply. There was no grand speech, no false promises, just those 3 words, heavy with meaning. The front door swung open before they could step down, and 3 young men spilled onto the porch, their faces alight with curiosity. Jack, the eldest at 18, was tall and broad-shouldered like his father, his dark hair tousled from work. Thomas, 17, leaned against the porch post with a book tucked under his arm, his sharp eyes taking in the newcomers with quiet interest. And Ben, 15 and still growing into his limbs, grinned openly, as if the arrival of 3 strange girls was the most exciting thing to happen in months. "Boys," Mr. Carter said, "these are Lily, Rose, and Daisy. They'll be staying with us from now on." The brothers exchanged glances, surprise, confusion, a flicker of something unspoken, but none of them questioned it. Jack was the first to step forward, nodding at Lily with a respectful tip of his hat. Thomas offered Rose a small, polite smile, while Ben, unable to contain himself, crouched down to Daisy's eye level and held out a hand. "I've got a puppy in the barn," he said conspiratorially. "Wanna see?" Daisy hesitated, glancing up at Rose, who gave a tiny, uncertain nod. Then, with a shyness that was almost painful to witness, the smallest girl placed her hand in Ben's and let him lead her away. The inside of the house was warm and worn, the wooden floors scuffed from years of boots, the walls lined with simple shelves holding jars of preserves and well-used tools. A fire crackled in the hearth despite the season. Mr. Carter had sent word ahead, and the boys had prepared for their arrival. A pot of stew simmered over the flames, its rich scent filling the room, and for the first time in longer than they could remember, the sisters realized how hungry they were. Mr. Carter motioned toward the table. "Sit. Eat." It wasn't a request. The meal passed in near silence, the clink of spoons against bowls the only sound. The girls ate slowly at first, as if afraid the food might vanish, then with growing urgency as their bodies remembered what it was to be full. Mr. Carter watched them without comment, his gaze lingering on the way Lily's shoulders stayed rigid even as she ate, the way Rose's eyes darted to the door every so often, as though expecting their father to burst in at any moment. When the bowls were empty, Mr. Carter pushed back his chair. "You'll have the upstairs room, all 3 of you, together. There's bedding, and the boys can fetch anything else you need." He paused, then added, "No one will come for you here. You're safe." It was the second time he'd said those words, and this time, Lily met his eyes. "Why?" she asked, her voice low but firm. "Why bring us here?" The room stilled. The boys glanced at their father, waiting. Mr. Carter didn't answer right away. He studied her, the defiance in her gaze, the way she held herself like someone twice her age. Then, with a quiet certainty, he said, "Because it was the right thing to do." That was all. No grand explanation, no flowery sentiment. Just the truth, plain and unadorned. Later, when the lanterns had been dimmed and the house settled into the deep quiet of night, the sisters lay in the unfamiliar softness of their new beds, listening to the sounds of the ranch, the distant lowing of cattle, the rustle of wind through the trees, the steady creak of the house settling around them. Rose turned onto her side, her voice barely a whisper. Do you think we can stay?" Lily didn't answer right away. Then, in the darkness, she reached out and found her sister's hands, gripping them tightly. "We're staying," she said. And for the first time in a long time, it sounded like a promise. Morning came to the Carter Ranch not with a sudden burst of light, but with the slow, golden unfurling of dawn across endless fields. The rooster's crow split the silence first, soon followed by the creak of floorboards as the household stirred to life. Downstairs, the clatter of pots and the rich aroma of coffee signaled Mr. Carter was already at the stove, his large hands moving with quiet efficiency as he prepared breakfast. Upstairs, Lily awoke with a start, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar walls surrounding her before the events of the previous day came rushing back. Beside her, Rose slept curled protectively around Daisy, their breathing deep and even in the way of those finally resting without fear. Lily dressed quickly in the simple calico dress left folded at the foot of her bed, her fingers lingering on the sturdy fabric so different from the threadbare rag she'd arrived in. At the soft knock on the door, she instinctively positioned herself between her sisters and the unknown visitor, shoulders squared for whatever might come. Jack's voice, low and hesitant, carried through the wood. "Breakfast is ready when you are." The kitchen hummed with activity when the sisters descended. Thomas sat at the table mending a bridle, his clever fingers working the leather with practiced ease. Ben animatedly recounted some mishap with the chickens to his father, gesturing wildly until Mr. Carter fixed him with a look that quieted the boy without a word. The scene was so ordinary, so effortlessly familial that the sisters paused in the doorway, uncertain of their place in this daily ritual. Mr. Carter turned from the stove, his gaze sweeping over them. "Sit," he said, not unkindly, nodding toward empty chairs. "There's work to be done after eating." The words might have sounded harsh to unfamiliar ears, but Lily recognized the gift in them, not charity, but belonging. As she helped Daisy onto a chair, she noticed Rose's eyes lingering on the bookshelf in the corner, her fingers twitching slightly as if aching to touch the spines. Days melted into weeks with the steady rhythm of ranch life. The sisters learned the weight of a milk pail, the stubbornness of a mule, the satisfaction of bread properly kneaded. Lily took to ranch work with fierce determination, matching Jack stride for stride as they repaired fences under the relentless sun. Where others might have seen only hardship, she found purpose in each blistered palm and sweat-soaked shirt proof she could earn her keep. Rose discovered an unexpected sanctuary in Thomas's small library. The first time he caught her gingerly tracing the title of a volume of poetry, he'd simply said, "You can borrow it if you like." The quiet offer sparked something between them, he the patient teacher, she the eager student. Evenings found them bent over books by lamplight, her soft questions met with his thoughtful explanations about everything from Greek myths to cattle breeding. Daisy became Ben's shadow, her initial shyness melting like spring snow under his good-natured teasing. He showed her how to collect eggs without upsetting the hens, which berries grew sweetest along the creek, and the secret whistling language they used to communicate across the pastures. When nightmares woke her screaming, it was Ben who appeared at her bedside with a candle and ridiculous stories until her tears turned to laughter. Mr. Carter observed it all from the periphery, his presence as steady as the old oak by the barn. He never spoke of the auction, never treated the girls as anything less than his own. Yet sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, Lily would catch him watching them with an expression she couldn't quite name, something between sorrow and quiet joy. One such evening found the family gathered on the porch after supper, the air thick with fireflies and the scent of honeysuckle. Daisy drowsed against Ben's shoulder while Rose and Thomas debated some point of history, their voices rising and falling in easy rhythm. Lily sat apart, as she often did, until Jack settled beside her with 2 cups of coffee. "You don't always have to be on guard, you know," he said quietly, handing her a cup. The words startled her. "I'm not." "You are," he interrupted gently. "Every muscle ready to fight. But you're home now." The simple declaration hung between them, fragile as a spider's web. Somewhere in the distance, a whippoorwill called, the sound lonely and sweet. Lily looked down at her hands, no longer the soft hands of a girl, but not yet the worn hands of a woman, and realized with sudden clarity that she hadn't scanned the horizon for danger in days. Inside the house, Mr. Carter stood at the window watching his unlikely family, the ghost of a smile touching his weathered face. Outside, the first stars blinked awake over the ranch, their light falling indiscriminately on all who called it home. The first warning came in the form of dust on the horizon, a thin, dark line rising above the scrubland that signaled riders approaching from the east. Mr. Carter noticed it first while mending the corral gate, his hands pausing mid-swing of the hammer as his gaze fixed on that distant disturbance. He said nothing to the others, but his shoulders tensed almost imperceptibly beneath his worn work shirt, the way they did when he sensed trouble brewing. The girls were scattered across the ranch that afternoon, Lily helping Jack repair the chicken coop, where a fox had broken in the night before, Rose reading aloud to Daisy in the shade of the cottonwood while she shelled peas for supper, Thomas and Ben checking fences along the north pasture. None of them noticed the change in Mr. Carter's demeanor as he casually walked to the house and returned with his rifle leaning against the porch rail within easy reach. The riders materialized slowly, 3 men on tired horses, their clothes travel-stained and their faces unshaven. The lead horse carried a slumped figure Lily recognized instantly despite the distance, her hands freezing around the wooden slat she'd been holding as her blood turned to ice. Mr. Harker looked worse than she remembered, thinner, dirtier, his once fine coat hanging loose on his frame, but the calculating glint in his eye was the same as it had been on the auction block. The 2 men flanking him had the look of hired muscle, their hands resting near their pistols as their gaze swept over the prosperous ranch with poorly concealed greed. Jack's hand closed around Lily's wrist, his voice low and urgent. "Get to the house. Now." But it was too late. Mr. Harker had spotted them, his mouth twisting into something that might have been a smile if it held any warmth. "There's my girls," he called, his voice carrying the false cheer of a man who'd practiced this moment in his head. "Come give your pa proper welcome." The ranch erupted into motion. Mr. Carter moved like a shadow between the girls and the newcomers, his posture deceptively relaxed but his eyes sharp as flint. Thomas and Ben came running from the pasture, their faces flushed with exertion and alarm. Rose had already pulled Daisy behind her, the bowl of peas forgotten on the ground, peas scattering like green marbles across the dirt. "You're trespassing, Harker," Mr. Carter said, his voice calm but carrying an edge that made the hired men shift uneasily in their saddles. Mr. Harker's smile didn't waver. "Now, is that any way to greet the father of your, what do you call them? Servants? Pets?" His gaze slid past Mr. Carter to Lily, and something in his expression turned ugly. "Though I see you've been keeping my eldest mighty close, ranchman. Maybe I ought to be charging you more." Jack moved before anyone could stop him, crossing the distance in 3 long strides and dragging Mr. Harker from his saddle with a violence that sent the horses skittering sideways. The hired men reached for their guns but froze when Mr. Carter's rifle came up in one smooth motion, the barrel unwavering. "You sold them," Jack growled, his fist twisted in Mr. Harker's collar as he hauled the man to his feet. "You don't get to call yourself their father anymore." A strange silence fell over the ranch, the kind of quiet that comes before lightning strikes. Daisy had begun to cry silently, her small hands clutching Rose's skirt. Lily stood rooted to the spot, torn between the urge to flee and the unfamiliar desire to step forward, to finally face the man who'd haunted her nightmares. It was Rose who broke the stalemate. "We're not going with you," she said, her voice trembling but clear. "We're staying here." Mr. Harker's face darkened. "You'll do as you're told, girl." "No." The word came from Lily, quiet but final. She stepped forward, her chin lifted, and in that moment, she looked every bit the woman she'd become, not the scared girl from the auction block. "You don't own us anymore. We belong here now." Something shifted in the air, some unspoken understanding that this was a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Mr. Harker's hired men exchanged glances, suddenly less certain about their employer's promises of easy money. Even the horses seemed to sense the change, their ears flicking nervously. Mr. Carter lowered his rifle fractionally, his gaze never leaving Mr. Harker's face. "You heard them," he said. "Now get off my land." For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Mr. Harker wrenched himself free from Jack's grip, his face twisted with rage, and something else, something almost like shame. "This isn't over," he spat, but the words rang hollow as he scrambled back onto his horse. The hired men needed no further encouragement. They wheeled their mounts and kicked them into a gallop, leaving nothing behind but a cloud of dust and the echo of hoofbeats. Long after the riders had disappeared, the family stood motionless, the adrenaline slowly ebbing. Daisy was the first to move, darting forward to wrap her arms around Mr. Carter's legs in a spontaneous hug that seemed to startle the man more than the confrontation had. One by one, the others followed, Rose touching Thomas's sleeve in silent thanks, Ben clapping Jack on the back with forced cheer, Lily meeting Mr. Carter's gaze with a nod that spoke volumes. That night, as the fire burned low in the hearth and the house creaked its familiar nighttime song, no one spoke of what had happened. There was no need. The unspoken truth hung in the air between them. As real as the roof over their heads, they were no longer a collection of strangers bound by circumstance, but a family forged by choice. And outside, under a sky brilliant with stars, the wind carried away the last traces of dust from the road, leaving the ranch peaceful once more. Time moved differently on the ranch after Mr. Harker's visit, not in great leaps, but in subtle shifts like the changing angle of sunlight through the seasons. The confrontation had left its mark on them all, invisible but profound, like the faint scars on Mr. Carter's hands from years of working the land. There was a new ease between the sisters and the Carter men now, a silent understanding that needed no words. Lily found herself rising earlier each morning, not from the old habit of vigilance, but to watch the sunrise paint the fields in gold alongside Jack. They worked in comfortable silence mostly, their conversations carried out in the language of shared labor, passing tools without asking, anticipating each other's movements as they repaired fences or tended livestock. It was during one such morning, while wrestling a stubborn post into place, that their hands brushed and lingered a moment too long. Lily felt something unspoken pass between them, as tangible as the morning dew clinging to the grass. Rose's world had expanded in the quiet corners of the ranch house, where Thomas's books became portals to places she'd never dreamed of seeing. Their reading sessions by the fire stretched later into the evenings, the space between them on the settee diminishing with each turned page. One rainy afternoon, when Thomas reached to adjust her grip on a volume of sonnets, his fingers tracing the line of hers as he turned the page, Rose realized with startling clarity that she'd been memorizing the curve of his smile longer than she'd known the words to any poem. Daisy, no longer the trembling child who'd arrived at the ranch, had grown into her newfound confidence under Ben's playful guidance. She could whistle through her teeth now, rope a post from 10 paces, and recite the names of every horse in the county. But it was during an ordinary moment, Ben bandaging her scraped knee after a tumble from the hayloft, that she noticed how his touch gentled when he thought no one was watching, his usual boisterousness giving way to unexpected tenderness. Mr. Carter observed these quiet transformations from his rocking chair on the porch, the creak of wood against wood keeping time with the crickets' evening song. He'd known this would happen, had hoped for it, if he was honest with himself, but seeing it unfold filled him with a quiet awe. The way Lily's shoulders relaxed when Jack entered a room, how Rose's laughter came easier in Thomas's company, the unspoken language of smiles and glances between Ben and Daisy, it was like watching the land heal after a long drought. The first frost came early that year, silvering the fields in the pre-dawn hours. Lily was in the barn when Jack found her, her breath making ghostly shapes in the cold air as she mended a harness. Without preamble, he took the leather from her hands and spoke the words that had been years in the making. "Marry me." Not a question, not a plea, just a simple truth, as inevitable as sunrise. Rose and Thomas's confession came wrapped in poetry, murmured over a shared book in the firelight, their foreheads touching as they traded sonnets like promises. Ben, ever unpredictable, proposed to Daisy during a snowball fight, dropping to one knee in the snow as she stood frozen with a snowball raised overhead. "Well," he'd grinned up at her, snow melting in his hair, "are you gonna hit me or marry me?" The weddings were simple affairs, held on successive Sundays in the ranch house parlor. Mr. Carter stood as witness for each, his large hands surprisingly deft as he fastened Rose's borrowed pearls at her throat, adjusted Lily's simple wreath of wildflowers, and tied Daisy's sash with solemn care. When the last "I do" had been spoken and the final kiss exchanged, he gathered them, all his sons, their brides, into an embrace that spoke more eloquently than any speech. That night, as the newlyweds retreated to their respective corners of the house and the wind whispered through the eaves, Mr. Carter sat alone by the dying fire. The house felt different now, fuller, richer, the way land feels after a long-awaited rain. He thought of his late wife, wondering if she could see this strange, beautiful family they'd somehow created across the years, and for the first time in a long while, the memory brought more comfort than pain. Outside, the stars burned bright over the Carter ranch, their light falling on fresh tracks in the snow, not the solitary path of a widower, but the intertwined trails of three young couples beginning their journeys, all leading back to the same sturdy porch, the same warm hearth, the same enduring love that had saved them all. The first snow came howling down from the northern mountains like an uninvited guest, blanketing the Carter ranch in a silence so profound it seemed to swallow sound itself. What began as delicate flakes dancing on the wind soon became a relentless onslaught, the kind of storm old-timers in town would later call the Big One, their voices hushed with the memory of it. The wind carved drifts against the barn doors until they groaned under the pressure, while the house creaked like a ship at sea, its timbers protesting under winter's furious assault. Mr. Carter stood at the kitchen window, his coffee gone cold in his hands as he watched the blizzard rage. The almanac had predicted a mild winter, but the old rancher had learned long ago to trust the ache in his bones over any farmer's predictions. Behind him, the newlyweds moved with quiet purpose, Lily and Jack inventorying their dwindling supplies in hushed tones, Rose and Thomas banking the fire with practiced efficiency, Ben and Daisy bundling every available blanket into makeshift barriers against the creeping cold. No one spoke of their fears, but the way their hands lingered when passing objects, the stolen glances between spouses, these told the story well enough. By the third day, when the snow showed no sign of relenting, the cattle began to low in desperate hunger from the barn. Jack and Ben suited up in every layer they could muster, their scarves wrapped tight against the stinging wind as they ventured into the whiteout. Lily watched from the window as her husband disappeared into the storm, her nails leaving half-moon impressions in her palms. It was Rose who noticed first the way the chimney draft had changed pitch, the ominous trickle of soot dusting the hearthstones. The flues clogged, Thomas realized with dawning horror, already moving toward the ladder to the roof. Mr. Carter's hand on his shoulder stopped him mid-step. "My house," the old rancher said quietly, pulling on his gloves. "My responsibility." What happened next unfolded in slow, nightmarish fragments, Mr. Carter's precarious climb up the icy ladder, the way the wind nearly tore him from the roof's edge, the terrible moment when his boot slipped on the frost-slick shingles. The crash of his body hitting the snow-packed ground seemed to shake the very foundations of the house. In the chaos that followed, it was Lily who took charge with a calm that belied her racing heart. "Jack and Ben, get him inside. Thomas, clear that flue before we all suffocate. Rose, boil water and tear clean linens." Daisy, her voice caught momentarily at the sight of her youngest sister's terrified face. "Daisy, I need you to be brave." They worked through the night in the flickering lamplight, the storm's fury muted to a distant howl as they focused on the man who had saved them all. Rose's hands, so often buried in books, proved surprisingly deft at stitching the gash on Mr. Carter's temple. Thomas and Jack took turns keeping pressure on his likely broken ribs while Ben kept the fires burning against the creeping cold. Lily and Daisy took the vigil at his bedside, their voices weaving together in quiet songs from half-remembered childhoods as they monitored his ragged breathing. For 3 endless days, the house held its breath. The blizzard outside mirrored the tempest within Jack's uncharacteristic snappishness, Rose's silent tears into the wash basin, Ben's restless pacing that wore grooves in the floorboards. Only Daisy remained eerily calm, her small hand perpetually clasped around Mr. Carter's work-roughened fingers as she whispered stories about the ranch's future into his unhearing ears. Then, on the fourth morning, as dawn broke crystalline across the snowfields and the wind finally stilled, Mr. Carter's eyes fluttered open. His first sight was the entire family arrayed around his bed, their faces drawn with exhaustion but alight with hope. His first words, rasped through cracked lips, were pure Carter stubbornness. "Who's been milking the cows?" The laughter that followed shook loose the fear that had gripped them all, leaving in its place something stronger, the unshakable knowledge that they were no longer simply people who lived together, but a family forged in the crucible of hardship. As the weak winter sun streamed through the windows, thawing the frost from the panes, Lily caught Jack's eye across the room and understood without words that this was the true meaning of home, not just shelter from the storm, but the people who weathered it with you. Outside, as the ranch emerged from its white shroud, the first brave birds began their morning songs, their melodies carrying across snow that would one day melt into the earth, nourishing the roots of the wildflowers yet to come. Inside, by the crackling fire, Mr. Carter sipped the broth Rose held to his lips and watched his family move about their tasks with newfound purpose, his heart too full to speak the gratitude that threatened to overwhelm him. The storm had passed, but what it had revealed in its wake would endure long after the last snowdrift melted the unbreakable bonds of a family chosen, not by blood, but by something far stronger. Years had a way of folding into one another on the Carter Ranch, each season layering upon the last like the rings of the old oak by the creek. The scars from that terrible winter had long since faded. Mr. Carter's ribs had mended stronger than before, the chimney had been rebuilt with stone from the north pasture, and even the memory of the blizzard's howling winds had softened into family lore told by firelight. What remained, what would always remain, was the quiet understanding that had taken root between them all during those frozen days, the unshakable knowledge that they were bound together not by chance, but by choice. The ranch bore the marks of their collective love in every corner. The main house had grown along with the family, a new wing added when Lily and Jack welcomed their first child, a sturdy cradle built by Thomas's hands awaiting Rose's impending confinement, a small desk in the corner where Daisy taught Ben how to painstakingly form his letters, though he still preferred the open range to paperwork. The fields stretched greener than ever before, the cattle multiplied under careful tending, and the vegetable garden, once Rose's solitary domain, now sprawled in abundant chaos, with Daisy's flower beds spilling color along its borders. Mornings began with a symphony of familiar sounds, the creak of the porch swing where Mr. Carter took his coffee, watching as the younger generations tumbled out into the dawn. Jack's deep voice calling orders to the hired hands, though he still sought Lily's quiet counsel on every decision. Thomas reading aloud from the newspaper while Rose kneaded bread, her rounded belly brushing the countertop. Ben chasing squealing children through the yard as Daisy laughed from the clothesline, her arms full of sun-warmed linens. On Sundays, the entire clan would pile into wagons and make the trek to town, drawing curious glances and whispered admiration. The once frightened Harker sisters had become women of substance, Lily's sharp mind respected at cattle auctions, Rose's gentle wisdom sought after by young mothers, Daisy's vibrant spirit infecting everyone she met. The Carter boys had grown into men. Their father could be proud of Jack's steady leadership, Thomas's innovative farming techniques, Ben's uncanny ability to gentle even the wildest Mustang. And Mr. Carter? The townsfolk tipped their hats a little lower when he passed, recognizing in his quiet dignity the kind of man who built legacies not with words, but with actions. The years turned like pages in a well-loved book. Children grew, new babies arrived, silver threaded through dark hair. Through droughts and floods, through lean years and abundant ones, the family thrived because they did what families do, they showed up. Lily wiping fevered brows during the influenza outbreak. Thomas staying up all night to help a mare deliver twins. Rose turning her prized rose bushes into medicines for ailing neighbors. Ben riding through a lightning storm to fetch the doctor for a struggling homesteader. And always, always, Mr. Carter's steady presence at the center of it all, his love for this unlikely family written in every early morning, every shared meal, every quiet moment of understanding. One golden autumn evening, when the grandchildren had been put to bed and the adults lingered around the fire, Mr. Carter did something extraordinary. He told the story. The real story of how he'd seen three terrified girls on an auction block and recognized something in their eyes that mirrored his own loneliness. Of how bringing them home had saved him as much as it had saved them. His voice roughened when he spoke of watching them grow into women, of the pride he felt seeing his sons become husbands worthy of them, of the profound gratitude he carried every day for this patchwork family they'd created together. The fire crackled in the hearth, casting flickering light over faces wet with tears. No one spoke when he finished. They didn't need to. The squeeze of Lily's hand on Jack's arm, the way Rose leaned into Thomas's shoulder, Daisy's fingers laced with Ben's, these were the only answers necessary. Outside, the first stars blinked awake over the Carter Ranch, their light falling on the new generation of children sleeping safe in their beds, on the fields that would feed them, on the love that would sustain them. The story that had begun with an act of kindness would continue for generations yet unborn, its chapters written in the simple, enduring acts of daily life, a pot of soup shared, a lesson patiently taught, a hand held in the dark. And as the embers faded to ash in the hearth, one truth remained brighter than any flame. Family isn't just who you're born to, it's who you choose to stand with through all of life's storms and sunshine. The end. If you enjoyed this heartwarming tale of resilience, redemption, and the enduring power of family, be sure to subscribe for more stories that celebrate the unbreakable bonds we forge in life's unexpected journeys. Your next unforgettable adventure awaits, just one click away.